Hi everyone. I have made no secret of my contempt for the Trump administration, and specifically Donald Trump. It's no new thing. I've often vocalized on this channel what I think of Donald Trump. Um, but it must never be forgotten that Donald Trump wouldn't be in the position he's in without having support from others. And some of that support it has to be said, from the American electorate. We can't say in 2024 that it was, a fluke of the Electoral College. She got the popular vote this time. Sad reality is a majority of voting age Americans put Trump back into the White House. I have a lot of sympathy for those who didn't. A lot of them are changing their tune now because they're realizing it isn't what it was cracked up to be. And, I imagine some of those people were affected by Musk's civil service cuts, which, by the way, included ex-veterans. Musk has left the White House, but I don't give him any credit for that. I think everything Elon Musk does is self-driven. Um, I'm pleased to see internal fractions because hopefully it'll fragment so much that the Trump administration will collapse. But the way the American system is, they don't have elections. It's fixed in 4-year terms. Um, but it's difficult to see how this administration is going to last without some sort of impeachment. Means nothing, as we've seen. Having a criminal record means nothing, as we have seen. But there may be some sort of, it may be that the internal fractions get so much that they self implode somehow. Like there's some sort of internal coup or something. I don't know. I don't know. But it's very clear that it's a very unstable administration. Um, but that having been said, I want to talk about the press secretary, Karoline Leavitt. Very young. She's only about 28. She's one of the youngest ever, if not the youngest ever. I'd have to double check that, but she's got into a feud with the BBC because she claimed that they have taken Hamas information at face value, and she's used that to attack the BBC over coverage of what's going on in Gaza. And the obvious response to this is, why do they take everything Israel says at face value? The BBC has defended itself. It said it's just plain wrong what she's come out with, and they have went into details as to how they verify information. Um, I think in any war zone you're going to get different pieces of information coming from different sources, and when Israel restricts a lot of access to Gaza, it doesn't make it easy. It is true that Hamas controls a lot of information there, but the narrative that Caroline Leavitt is trying to put out is that there's no real civilian suffering going on in Gaza. That is absolutely contemptible. It's actually disgusting. Um, my response to that is that the BBC has its flaws. Um, I haven't shied away from criticizing the BBC, but when it comes to this issue, I trust the BBC a lot more than I trust Caroline Leavitt and the rotten administration that she shamefully represents. Um, I mean, this is a woman who posts these nice homely pictures of her with her child on her social media, um, and yet she literally has no problem with Palestinian mothers being killed in their hundreds and injured. When we include the injured, it goes well into the thousands. I don't know if it's possible to get an exact figure. Um, I certainly wouldn't trust Israeli sources. I trust Hamas sources, of course not. But I think it's just common sense that when you have an extensive aerial bombardment, when you have aid being cut off, when you have the sort of military agenda that Israel has put into Gaza, and when you consider that the Netanyahu cabinet is full of hawks that want it wiped off the face of the earth, the idea that there isn't heavy civilian casualties is just not plausible. It just isn't plausible in that sort of warfare. Um, I think it also cements the fact, actually, that the pro-Israel lobby is very, very powerful in the United States. Now, I want to be very careful how I say this because some malicious people might say that's an anti-Semitic thing. Not at all. Some of the people I respect the most are Jewish groups that speak out against what Israel is doing. Um, And there was that incendiary incident in Colorado recently where a guy attacked the pro-Israel demo. This sort of thing's been happening a lot throughout the course of this conflict. And, people on both sides have been attacked. There have been pro-Israelis attacked, there have been pro-Palestinians attacked. It's unfortunate to see. I condemn it. I don't think further violence helps anyone, so I do condemn it. But pro-Israelis are being deeply dishonest about what's happening there, and I think there is absolutely moral double standards. Anyone who is blindly supporting Israel um, is complicit. Is complicit in what it's doing. That goes without saying. Now, I have enormous sympathy for the families of the hostages, and obviously they want their loved ones out. But I find it rather sickening that there is more concern for them than there is for the thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinians killed. Um, and the arrogance of Caroline Leavitt to target the BBC, she should mind her own damn business. Um, I think anyone who works for the Trump administration, given that he's a convicted criminal, has to be morally bankrupt, or they're either greedy or morally bankrupt, or both. I mean, it's lucrative, that's a high profile, very well paid position being White House press secretary, a very high exposure position, it's a pressurizing position. But it really, really makes me wonder about the moral DNA of someone like that to work for a man like Donald Trump. I mean, she has a long track record of being a Trump fan, from what I could tell. She's long been hostile to the American media, so that's why when I hear members of the Trump administration, like her and JD Vance and others, lecture Britain and other European countries about free speech, their hypocrisy is just staggering. We do have problems in this country. I don't say that we are perfect, and I've been very vocal about the problems that we do have. But I absolutely am convinced we should take no lectures from any member of this criminal administration. Um, they're in no position to lecture anyone. I mean, if Donald Trump had his way, CNN and all the other networks in the United States would be kowtowing to him. I don't think he really believes in a free press. He wants absolutely positive coverage. So Donald Trump has a track record of dismissing any sort of criticism whatsoever as fake news. Um, One of the most absurd things that Caroline Leavitt came out with in her social media in the last few days was blaming Joe Biden for all the problems in the world. She blamed him for the war in Ukraine. She blamed him for the crisis in the Middle East. She blamed him for everything. And this goes beyond just partisan politics. It's nonsense because Joe Biden's 82 years old. He's retired. He's no longer president. Um, she had this little swipe about him going shopping. Now, what exactly did she expect him to do? Here's the irony. If Joe Biden actually was politically active in the sense that she's alluding to, i.e., if he was involved in diplomatic work or something, she'd be attacking him for that. So this is just a hack job by a very, very shallow, um, pathetic individual. She's in a position of power and she's abusing that power. It's a disgrace. Um, I just feel nothing but contempt for members of the Trump administration. The first time around, I could have forgiven it. I could have said, well, some of those people, they're putting the country before the party and they're working for the administration, not necessarily out of a love for Trump, but because they see it as service to the country. This time around, I think that with everything that's happened, the people that serve Donald Trump, they've sold their soul. Perhaps most disappointing is Marco Rubio, because once upon a time he was a half decent Republican. He had a track record of speaking out against dictatorships. Now he's a full on PR guy. As Secretary of State, he just, I think it's contemptible that he says, he gaslights Volodymyr Zelensky and says, we just want peace. What's wrong with that? Ignoring the fact that the United States so shamefully voted with Russia, North Korea, Belarus, and a small number of other despotic nations at the UN. Um, the gaslight Zelensky and the Ukrainians is not wanting peace is just contemptible. Um, JD Vance, I could think, is a complete charlatan. I think he's um, I think he's dangerous actually, because I think he's ambitious and he's still very young. He's vice president of the United States, so something happens to Trump medically, JD Vance is president. The only silver lining to that is he doesn't have the same sort of cult following as Trump, not even close. Um, but other members of the administration, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert Kennedy Jr., these people, it's just like a circus of um, people who are utterly unqualified for the positions they're in. It's an administration made up of criminals, conspiracy theorists, um, egoists. It's just, I've never seen this in my lifetime. And yes, you can find examples of corruption or shady dealings in every American administration. It would be very naive to think that in corridors of power that hasn't happened in the past. And I don't for a second say that other presidents have had a spotless record. That would clearly be wrong. But I do think the Trump administration is uniquely bad. Donald Trump has finally woken up and realized that Putin isn't to be trusted. He's finally managed to bring himself to condemn what Putin's doing in Ukraine. But that's after gaslighting the Ukrainians. That's after blaming the Ukrainians. Um, I don't trust anything that Donald Trump says or does. Um, and we've got 3.5 more years of this longer. So yeah, this video is about Karoline Leavitt, and she's a particularly contemptible example. I think that there's a wider issue here, which is these members of the Trump administration enable them. Because if it wasn't for them, Donald Trump would be dismissed as an aging, eccentric demagogue. I don't think he'd be taken very seriously, but these people empower him. And it's sad to see. And you look at these Trump rallies and they're so deluded. They think that the world respects America now. It doesn't. Donald Trump hasn't made America stronger. He's made America more disliked. He's increased animosity towards the United States. I do think the European leaders need to show a bit more backbone. The only Western leader that's really stood up to Donald Trump is Mark Carney. Yeah, Starmer and Macron corrected him at those press briefings, but Starmer still has this notion that we should roll out the red carpet. That's been scaled back recently because I think he's realized how deeply unpopular it is. Because Trump is not popular in this country. Don't. I would urge people not to sort of look at what reform it's saying. I mean, Nigel Farage is just, for all his this, I find it really galling. Nigel Farage thinks he's such a great patriot, and he's often attacked others on that point. Yet he is a complete grinning Cheshire cat when it comes to Donald Trump. He's absolutely Trump's poodle. I mean, Tony Blair used to be mocked for being George W. Bush's poodle, but there was a veneer of diplomacy there. There was a veneer of, you know, I do think Blair went too close to America, but that isn't even comparable to just how much Farage grovels to Donald Trump. I mean, it's when Farage appeared at those rallies and when he has that stupid Cheshire cat grin beside Donald Trump, he looks like a fan meeting his favorite musician or something. It's pathetic. That isn't patriotism. It's the one big thing about reform I do not trust is their foreign policy. I don't trust it. I think reform would be sycophantic towards Trump's America because they respect it. They respect that. They respect the Trumpian brand. That's the truth. Sticking with reform, and I'll just make this brief because it's not the main point of the video. Lee Anderson had this mocking critique of Greta Thunberg. Apparently, she's going on a flotilla to Gaza. Now, to be clear, I'm not a big fan of Greta Thunberg, and I don't on say any of the criticism I've said before. She supported Just Stop Oil. I think she is a zealot. I don't have much time for her. But Lee Anderson and the Daily Express, which report this, they claim that Lee Anderson took her down. They would do well to think of the bigger issue here, which is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. If Thunberg is involved in the humanitarian convoy, I'm not going to criticize her for that. I've been very critical of some of the approach she's taken in the environmental thing, and I'm very critical of her support for Just Stop Oil. I think that was arrogant and contemptuous of the public. I'm not going to criticize her for having compassion towards Palestinians. Any decent human being should have compassion towards the Palestinians. Israel has absolutely lost support. And again, I reiterate, Caroline Leavitt's accusing the BBC of taking Hamas at face value. I don't think that's fair. But the Trump administration takes everything Israel says at face value. Why? What's happened to aid workers out there um, has been verified by independent sources. That's another point about Gaza. Not everything comes from Hamas. There's independent sources on the ground, aid workers and many others that have no affiliation with Hamas. Um, People like Doctors Without Borders. I mean, are they really going to be branded Hamas sympathizers? I think that's nonsense. Um, because if you listen to Israeli sources, then anything that shows any sort of source or any group or any charity that shows any sort of intention of helping the Palestinians in any way, shape, or form is Hamas sympathizers. It's I think it's a particularly odious form of gaslighting. Now, for sure, there are some pro-Palestinians who are pro-Hamas, and I think they damage their movement. That's why I have no time for Kneecap, the Irish rapper trio, because you know putting up flags for Hamas and Hezbollah is absolutely brainless in this context. It isn't going to help anyone. It's only going to lead to those um, you know projections of pro-Palestinians being pro-Hamas. So I think that sort of thing causes more harm than good. But I think someone like Caroline Leavitt, I think she should be made a persona non grata in this country. It won't happen because Keir Starmer needs more of a backbone when it comes to the United States. I don't say that lightly. I take no pleasure from it. But absolutely no way should a state visit go ahead anytime soon. I'm pleased the King visited Canada recently. Canada, excuse me. That was an important statement, and he's diplomatic. He's not going to go there and denounce Trump, but the visit in itself is telling. It's very important, and I commend the King for doing it. There's another point about Biden, incidentally, that Levitt conveniently forgets. Even her boss, for once in his public life, had the decency to show some compassion towards Joe Biden, who's just been diagnosed with advanced cancer. Um, she didn't even have the grace to consider that. She's a disgrace. Um, but someone like Caroline Levitt, I don't think really has a moral compass. She's well paid, she's in a cushy position, and that's all she cares about. I do think you need to have a pretty empty soul to work for Donald Trump. I just don't see how any decent human being can work for that man. Um, because if you want to make the argument, some people might say, well, Nathan, there might be decent people who think they're serving America and they think they can kind of maybe reform from inside or something. I don't think so. I think in this administration, um, it's certainly the case of Marco Rubio, but and Vance, who used to be a Trump critic, um, all I can put it down to is greed, ambition. He's the president of the United States, so it's a stepping stone for them. Um, because without getting a cabinet kit together, Donald Trump wouldn't be in office. And every American who voted for him and now regrets it. I say, take some responsibility, admit that you were wrong. Um, because everything this rotten administration does, you've empowered it by voting for it. That's the truth. Uh, I just I can't believe how terrible this administration is. I mean, it's a struggle to think of anything good that comes out of it. There probably is a few things, but it's a struggle to think about it. Um, just the arrogance and the audacity for Caroline Leavitt to point fingers at the BBC. She should mind her own business. I'm getting a little bit sick of members of the Trump administration lecturing this country. Now, the BBC is our state broadcaster. Um, Starmer should get a backbone and push back on that. Just push back generally. I just think that my concern about Keir Starmer when it comes to America is like too many British prime ministers before him. He's been kind of awed by American power. I think if more Western countries stood up to Trump, he would back down because he's a bully. and like all bullies, they will back down. He's recently had the epithet of being a chicken. There's been a particular, um, I can't recall it off the top of my head, but it's an acronym spelling out the fact that he changes his mind on things at the last minute. That comes from pressure. I think if more Western countries stood up to Trump, he would back down a bit. I mean, just because the United States is the biggest economy in the world doesn't mean that everyone else has to be gladly pushed around by it. Um, I think if the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Australia, Canada, Japan, and other like-minded countries, South Korea, push back a bit, then Trump would back down. I don't agree with this notion that because of American power, we need to just be, oh, we need to, oh, let's be careful not to offend Donald Trump. No, it shouldn't work like that. It's not a respectful relationship. I'm not saying we should deliberately put up obstacles or deliberately provoke him, but I don't think we should operate under the basis of, well, we better be sensitive about what Donald Trump thinks. I mean, he's a man child who has tantrums and lashes out, and the danger of that is he's the president of the United States. He's in a position of immense power. Um, but I just wish Keir Starmer would show a little bit more backbone and not pander to Trump and not pander to China as well, because he does also do the latter. Let me know your thoughts.